Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Jason's Every Now and Then podcast. And today I am interviewing Mr. AJ Lawrence. AJ is a friend, a fellow DCer, and has been through some very exciting and interesting acquisition processes recently. And we're going to be talking about acquisitions, how not to screw them up, what went well and what went poorly in his acquisition, and what he's doing next. So, AJ, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm AJ. The easiest way to say is I've been playing on the internet since the 80s. Um, Built one of the early digital development firms in the 90s, sold it, but sold it in a way that made me lose money, if that was something that could be done from selling your company. Worked for a bunch of the early digital agencies after that. Then it got into some of the early digital marketing firms around the knots. Started an agency back in 2006. Turned around and sold the assets for it, which was kind of a fun way of splitting up the pieces and selling them to the highest bidder back in 2014. Then I've been a fractional CMO. I sit on a board of a couple of companies. Got really lucky with Bitcoin. And a few years ago, started getting into acquisitions. Micro acquired a few smaller agencies, bought a podcast, Beyond Eight Figures, and then recently, where Jason was kind of talking some of the lessons, I got very involved with a very interesting traumatic brain injury assessment and care firm out in Colorado. Um, that was a beautiful deal until it wasn't. And so, so a lot to share about what went right and what went wrong and the mistakes I made during that process.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So let's jump right into that process. I'm interested in
Mhm.
kind of the different phases of this. Like, how'd you decide that you wanted to acquire a business? How'd you decide that you wanted to
Mhm.
acquire this kind of business? What went well? What were some of the tools that you used going through all of this? Because you mentioned some AI stuff that you were
Mm.
doing that I found really
Yeah.
interesting. And then what blew up the deal? So let's just get started with what got you interested in acquiring a business and this kind of business?
Um, I actually so funny enough, I had acquired a few small agencies with the company I sold back in 14. We like around 2000, from about 2009 to about 2011, I acquired, acqui-hired, whatever the terminology. One firm I fully acquired, two others were more acqui-hires, and they all really helped me grow my agency quite well. But I never thought of it as an ongoing process. I thought it was too small. We were My goal was to reach 10 million, and we were still around 6, 7 million. So I kind of said, oh, when we're bigger, we'll do this. But these were opportunistic. And then I went through the process of selling. But before, there was a lot of like build to sell and all those books, other things. There was a lot of things I didn't know. All that stuff started happening, mid teens. And then I think I was at a DC, I think it was 2019 DC event. Someone mentioned Buy Then Grow. I forget the guy's name right off the top of my head on Even Digits course. Um, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I bought it, but it was one of those ones where it was kind of like I bought it and put it on my bookshelf about a year. And then COVID hit, and I was like, all right, I'm really bored. I just randomly picked it up. I'm like, all right, I'll read a couple of pages and see if there's anything here. And I was on the treadmill. I was like, I walked for 4 hours as I was reading the book, just like, oh, oh, oh. Um, it just blew my mind. I really just loved it. Um, started thinking about the thing, spent about 6, 7 months going deeper into the process. What do I need to do? All that. And then in went through the process, and I was first going to work. with a small team, we were going to create a search fund and go through, did a lot of the stuff. Didn't end up working. So that was about 8 months, but it got me deeper into sort of the levels of financing, the styles, the things. And then in 2003, started looking more seriously. Went to,
2003,
oh, sorry,
2023.
23. I have kids, and my oldest just turned 21. So part of the magic of my life is sometimes 2003 seems closer than yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get worse as I get older. But 2023 started looking more directly. And I had first, I got one small agency under LOI. And literally within 3 weeks, we found they had just lost about half of their business within a space of about 2 weeks, just as we had gotten them. So it was like, yay, this is not going to work. Um, then in started kissing frogs, a lot of frogs, a lot of frogs. Missed out on a couple of deals I wanted, and then I got a much larger 60-year-old six. Sounds weird when I say it that way. 60-plus-year-old um, local marketing firm that got spun out of one of the early Yellow Page ones out
Mm.
west, only to find right the day before we were supposed to sign that they had completely made up about 500,000 in profits by playing like a shell game between different things. Basically, they fired a bookkeeper and didn't pay her the 2 weeks extra. So she reached out to me and sent me extra, yeah, bank accounts that I hadn't been given with all the proof. And it was just like, so
Wow. Wow.
kind of a little bit of extra fun. And both of those deals, I probably would have figured out something was wrong, but both of those deals really came, those because of the due diligence firm really pushing on it. So, the one like first one where the business dropped out, I probably would have found out during the due diligence that something had happened. The other one with the local agency, I probably, if it hadn't been for the due diligence sort of consistently pushing and having made a decent relationship with the bookkeeper who got fired during the process, um, I probably have only found out after closing.
Wow.
So yeah,
Who
that
was the
was
team? Can you share the name of the team you
yeah,
used?
Elliot Holland of Guardian Due Diligence,
Okay.
really great
Great.
guy. Um, yeah, and definitely he's yeah. I always say he's one of us. He yeah teams all over the world. Theoretically, he's from Atlanta and his company's in Atlanta, but he's down in Colombia, Bogota, I think,
Gotcha.
whichever. Yeah, one of them. Yeah, living the DC life. Um,
Gotcha.
and went took a little break, took on a couple of projects, working with this British battery company doing mid scale. So basically, schools, small manufacturing, backup battery power. Took
Okay.
them as a fractional CMO for a while, and then started looking again. And it was funny because my target was marketing agencies, but sort of that like more strategy, more insight driven data focus.
I have a
And
question for you on
yeah,
the going
yeah,
back to do the CMO stuff. Were you going back to do the CMO stuff because you were bored, or or just get burnt out on it? Because I think you're in a position
yeah.
where you don't
So,
have to go do that kind of work. So, like tell me, like what was your
okay.
why?
So this is all right. So the way I kind of put it is I took off enough money, though with taxes and all other sorts of things and kids in the what I call small retirement. Then there's like looking at kind of doing the things you want to be doing. And when I walked away from the deal where we were, we had proof, but who knows? They kept swearing they were fake or whatever, the deal. And I was just like, I can't trust anything. So when I walked away from that deal, I was burnt. I felt like I've been lied to. It's like you kind of feel like you're in a tight relationship, and all of a sudden you find there's something they've been lying about, and you just do you trust relationships? And I know that's a weird way of putting it, but sometimes when you're going through the acquisition process, it really is a type of dating. It really feels like you're trying to build that type of relationship, at least my process. And it's funny because I'm working on something with someone who has the exact opposite type of acquisition philosophy than my relationship building structure. So, we'll talk about that later. So I was like, all right, I want a little bit. And I wanted to do something that was interesting and different. And also, I wanted to play around with some of the new AI tool, not new, but some AI tools, and this was last year, looking at things and being able to see if I could redo at least a lot of the marketing capability that used to take a lot of bodies, a lot of moving parts. If there were things between some no code, some automation, and some AI to kind of create a larger impact with a smaller amount of moving parts. The way I
Tell me,
kind of
tell me
look
about
at a
that.
lot of
What? Tell me.
yeah.
Let's dig into that. I think that due diligence is. I've been through due diligence a few times
Yeah.
now, on both sides, and it's a massive pain. And the bigger the business, the
Oh,
more pain it is. So if you can automate some of
yeah.
that, I would love to hear about it.
Well, okay. So what I was talking about doing was from marketing, but from a due diligence point, what's really interesting, to a large, all right. So when you work with a due diligence firm, almost always, just to kind of jump into that question, it's a little bit of a black box. They go off, they get their data. You get the same data. You could be building your own, and I know you love building spreadsheets. I've seen a few of yours. Actually, we met through a common friend, but also someone we both advise. And I've always talked about how amazing and how intricate his planning and his tracking spreadsheets are.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, he said he got a lot of the original idea from you, and then he took his engineering specialness
Yep.
and went way, 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 way further. But back to the point.
No, I,
Um,
I have to say
yeah,
that was Daniel,
Daniel,
and
yeah, security.
when I look at his tracking and KPI spreadsheets, I get serious spreadsheet envy. Like it's his stuff is so good. It's so good.
But it's not just the spreadsheet. And this, sorry, as an aside, it's not just the spreadsheets. It's as he shows them, because he never gives you, but he does show you, he has been updating them and feeding them for years.
Yep.
The amount of data points and the amount of stuff there. So it's like, I've built intricate things. And then within a couple months, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I can't feed this beast anymore. You know, That's why I loved
And
having teams back in the day. It was like, okay, you feed this. You know,
you know
now,
the trick. You
yeah,
know his trick. It's an easy trick. He doesn't work that much on his business. Like, I mean, he does. He works all of his hours.
yeah,
He works on his business, but for a long time he was working like 3 hours a day, and so or less. And so like
yeah.
and a lot of it was looking at his metrics, and so he was constantly like, oh, I got a little extra time. I'll go work on my spreadsheet. But you do that for like 5 years, and your spreadsheet looks pretty amazing.
Okay. I mean, once again, going off, he had, and I know his evolution to a larger degree. Now we're talking about this guy who built, he was definitely one of the things when you talk about a practitioner who then builds a company and then goes through the transition from being the practitioner to being a leader or CEO, however, not quite CEO, but more of that visionary versus the person doing it. He was a security consultant, really good one, loved to dive deep, and he just saw a little hole in the market and built it, and he now has a puppy that poops gold. A few million pounds per year gross, and 70, I think he's dropped from 74 to 72, and he's complaining about it.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
dropped from 74 to 72% net margins. It's like net, not gross, net.
yeah.
Um, and it's like, but so yeah, so the spreadsheet kind of getting there. So one things I found in looking at due diligence, and then that kind of comes to some of it becomes this very big black box. I realized with 2 deals ago, I could throw certain things and get certain amount of insights and directions by asking AI certain questions based on, oh, I'm seeing this. What are the things? So I started finding I could ask better questions of my due diligence team. That was the first layer of using some of the AI
Do
for
you,
it. With
do you have
yeah,
some examples of some of the questions
sure.
you asked them? Go for it.
So all right. So when we were looking at different things, specifically on the local, a lot of the thing was, we had trying to figure out sort of the lifetime value. They had all sorts of ways. They had print clients, they had digital clients. Print was a dying thing, but it was a question of it was trying to figure out if it was a question of like the AOL dial-up that took another 20 years before they finally just last month pulled the plug on the last dial-up clients and had, repeatedly sold that asset back and forth, back and forth. So it was like, okay, is this a nice, slow, predictable decline, or is this a cliff? And if I buy it for the print or with the print, am I going to have a negative revenue thing? So I had a bunch of by kind of playing around with that and seeing that and putting together the data, was able, I wasn't able to model it out, or at least from my level, because I don't have that type of spreadsheet capability. But I was able to start putting together questions that then I was asking the due diligence team based on it, where a lot of their focus was very much on truth of, truth of cash. What was the business actually generating the revenue it was saying? How did it run through the business? But I could start adding questions that weren't going to take them off, but give me an understanding of what the value of the business was. Or if I was seeing stuff from them, I was able to not just say, what does that mean? But like, okay, let me go ask AI, why is this important? Why it's not? And then ask them more. That was like level one. Like, why is this so important? Get a good thing, and then have better questions. Just start doing like 201 questions with the due diligence team rather than 101 questions when we were going back and forth.
What do you think was your best learning from the best thing that AI gave you and the best way that you used AI in this process?
So at that point, as then, so there was a beginning of figuring that there was a bit of halfway through the due diligence, a flag was raised that initially was kind of a yellowish, that grew orange until it got red by the due diligence team of a lot of paper shuffling. And this is when I started doing two things. And it's gotten more sophisticated type of prompt structure I use, but basically one, to try and get more insight and to kind of push them to reveal more about what was happening. I started prompting all my correspondence and my discussion prep through a framework of Never Split the Difference, which is a
Mm.
negotiating book. But I basically, and I've gotten more sophisticated because now I can actually dump the whole book into context and have it. But at the time, I just said using the frameworks. And at first, I listed the chapters, and then for a while, I just stopped doing it, and it gave me pretty good stuff. And I found like we were starting to get better information, or better yet, we were starting to get more obvious. They're not answering this question. Where before
Gotcha.
we were we were thinking they were answering the question. It was one of those like, oh, okay. And that's,
So,
how, yeah.
would you be comfortable sharing some of the prompts that I could put this in the description?
I'll pull some up. And better yet, since it's all archive, um, let me see if I can pull some of the older ones. And then I'll give you like one of the ones I just used recently.
Perfect. Yeah, that'd
Because,
be great.
yeah, what I started doing after a while, which made so much more sense, was literally just asking. I would play round robin. I would ask one of the ones to create a prompt and then have one of the other GPTs kind of critique it and do it and kind of, I would give it the level and kind of, I would start with just, doing a verbal dump of like 5 or 6 minutes of the things I was worried about, the things I was hoping to get, what I wanted to see, and all that. So I used that and I created one project for almost all of my. One of the things I did was create a project, or in ChatGPT where I had my never split the difference for any type of email around negotiations or just discussion of terms of anything. So that just became a default. I would move, you know, all types of emails I got. I would create an ongoing file. All transcripts got dumped into the files for the project, everything. So this way I could consistently how far I was off, what I was doing, where I was. And that got me to start playing around with like different game theory and creating a statistical, like, what is the likelihood? What are the odds this will close or this would go one way or the other based upon
Okay.
like, okay, if I'm doing these things, I then started kind of saying, all right. And
How
then it would
far
be like,
along
yeah,
how far along were
yeah.
you in the due diligence process when you started applying this game theory?
So that was near the end of not this last one, but two ago, where it was the local marketing, and we just had this. Yeah, it was something, and I was just like, something's just not right, and I was dumping everything, and it kind of was like, well, they're just not. Like the first thing identified, even without me saying, was they're not answering these questions, and they're doing everything they can to do it. So this is going to drop just everything by 25%, the likelihood.
Got it.
And on top of, here's where we think it is, but because of this, we're dropping it this amount. Yeah, I would ask it why and break down.
So
Yeah.
did you use that to adjust purchase price or terms? Did you come back and say, well, I haven't received this, and so that's increasing risk for me, and therefore I want XYZ other things in return?
It was more on terms. So like I used it on terms because, and the other thing is I used it as the boogeyman against financing of like, well, look, what you've done is this. Yeah, because of this, because you've had this structure, because you've done these things, or because your system is this way. I never blamed them until the very last argument that I was like, um, kind of losing the cool at the very last, yeah, at the 1 yard line there. But it was always kind of like, all right, if I saw something, if there was an increase in risk, decrease in probability of closing, whatever, and depending upon what was moving that change, that went into financing. Like that moved into a full seller financing with different types of payback condition loops, stuff like that, and then also how much money up front. And as it was very clear, like I got to the point where I was willing to go through, and this is where Guardian, yeah, Elliot was about to shoot me. Thank God he was in a different continent. I was just saying, okay, I'll go through this, but this is how I want, I want almost no money up front. And I want, if these conditions happen, the the seller financing is forgivable based upon these numbers happening. So like if this disappeared or if these numbers didn't happen or whatever, I wouldn't. I thought, I was trying to make the deal happen no matter what. And what Elian then pointed out, and this is the thing. AI was telling me as I was trying to do this and changing the deal, and I was saying, oh yes, this is the way to go about it. It'll always say yes to you within one way or
Yeah.
another. I now have system prompts that make it argue with me all the time, which sometimes is a little much, but at least it's better than, wow, that's the greatest question ever. I know. What are you? Why are you even? Yeah, I have it be very negative to me. It's a lot of fun. Um, but what I found was I was chasing the deal there. That's what the AI gave me the ability to understand it and constantly do that, and constantly try and structure based upon what I was finding. And I could ask it questions. I could ask it risk, like if we did this, how does my risk change, short, medium, long? What are the factors? Like I could start understanding that and then model and respond, which was nice because I have a bit of a finance background. I was an auditor of all things for about 1 year right out of school, and I was like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. But I understood a lot of the risk, but it wasn't like I could sit there. It was weak, my capabilities on my own, and the
Gotcha.
amount of
So
work.
if
Yeah.
you had had AI arguing with you from the very beginning, do you think it would have made a difference?
The usage of AI and what AI could do and the way it could think, or not think, the way it could provide answers changed greatly. Deep thinking and all that deep research. Um, Context changed, a few things changed in it. So like early on, I was asking it more like basically big glorified specific Google searches.
Got it.
What does it mean for this? How does it? Then it was like, okay, can you help me understand, what the positioning is in there? What is their negotiating structure? It was giving me almost like I would say at first, like when I had my agency, I used to say, well, you hire someone the first 3 to 6 months, they're just learning how to move the parts that you need them to move. They're not very useful other than like they look good in a meeting. 6 months, 3 to 6 months, 3 months if they're really good, they can actually start carrying the water from point A to point B without dropping it. Things start changing. Big jumps happen at 1, 3 years, and 5 years, depending upon, just different individuals. And I was noticing the responses I was getting during that period was like, oh, I'm getting something from like someone who's been trained for about 6 months. Oh, this is a decent 1 year, like
Got
a,
it.
account manager or, whatever. And
Uh,
then little by little, it was growing. So at that, I don't think I was looking at it right. I definitely, with this last deal, started right from the beginning, putting in different frameworks, outcomes I wanted, things, risk structures. Like I set conditions, I set red flags right from the beginning. Once I decided I wanted to move forward with the deal, and I used AI to be very much that Downing Thomas, 12th man. Yeah, there's all sorts of things that being that person who would hold me against, yeah, you said this, you put these things, these were your guardrails, these are the rules, da, 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 da. And then as I was having it come back and forth, it would kind of touch upon things like, okay, they're asking for this, but if you do that, it's going to change your risk profile by this amount, which will take it out of what your stated risk structure is.
I skipped something in the very beginning. We talked about a little bit about how you got into doing these deals, or actually a reasonable amount about
Yeah,
how we got into these deals, but this was a healthcare business. This was quite different than
outside of my
all the
window.
other
Yeah.
deals you've done. What made you want to jump into such a painful industry?
Since you lived in
Yeah,
that world.
exactly.
Actually, it's so funny because of you. I'm actually kicking an elder care, but tires on the elder care. But back to the point. Um, the broker who reached out to me, and I had had a very brief conversation with him on a digital agency, and I could tell right from the beginning that the sellers were kind of lying about what they're doing because I went on LinkedIn and I'm like, It's really funny. They and the whole team are working on a new company he just started 2 months ago. Everyone's listed. So, oh no, they're not doing. And then I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, like a day later, the guy like reached out to me, and I'm like, yeah, that's something you maybe want to clarify with
Yeah.
your client. So he reached out to me and said, look, I have something completely different. And part of it was this deal, this healthcare adjacent, let's just call it, because 90% of their revenue was actually not providing healthcare, but providing healthcare assessments for personal injury lawsuits. That
Gotcha.
was their kind of specialty. And the biggest thing they did, which gave them a much higher margin than the typical uh, assessment, injury assessment, they were brain injury assessment, which is a specialized form. But what made them special was they would take a piece of they would take payment upon settlement of the case, or either judgment or settlement. And if they didn't get a settlement, they would, wait, obviously their fee would disappear, which was very rare. It's less than 5% of assessment firms will do that, but it allowed them to, basically more than double the typical margins. Great margins. And it literally was one of the cases where, so, yeah, the negatives were interesting. They had this incredible accounts payable cycle over 3 years. It was a 16 to 20-month cycle, and there was different argument and literally different financials they provided right off the bat. I was like, wait, your sim says this, and the spreadsheet you gave me says this. And then you gave me this in the first interview of a different date. You have three different dates. And, it was like, okay, there was a bunch of things wrong. But what was interesting was one, literally a 72-year-old who had poured his life into this for 30 years was retiring. Yeah, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go do something better, or I see the writing on the wall. This was literally retirement. Yeah, there wasn't much more. There was good, they had a number two doctor in place. Structure of doing these things was pretty straightforward. They had limited their geolocation because the main, the retiring doctor didn't want to travel other than to go play golf. So there was like, there had been some growth restrictions purely based upon the desires, and were clearly from the desires of the seller, not because of uh, the market. And then they were literally, their CRM was like, oh yeah, I write down names of the people I meet at conferences and I try and follow up with them. And it
Okay.
was like,
Right.
and
So
then I speak at, it was,
good growth
the fax
potential,
machine.
easy
Yeah.
ways to grow the business, not in an industry that you knew, but you saw the holes, you saw it was pretty easy, you saw it was something that you could improve well. So what happened?
There were a bunch of things but there were two main big things that happened during it. One, um, the broker very clearly was not educating the client on what different things, especially when, I was like, look, I'm bound, I'm doing this with an SBA loan. There are certain conditions, criteria, blah, 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 blah. There are impacts on this, everything from, you retaining ownership or not retaining, how notes, seller financing have to be structured, and the type of working capital that needs to be included or priced for one way or the other, and then lease. So I walked through and I got a lot of yeses early, only to find after the LOI was agreed upon that they didn't know what they had agreed to in certain cases.
Got it. So was this a
And it
broker
was so,
problem or was this a them problem? Or was it both?
well, It was a me problem at the end of the day. I did not, you know, I kind of knew there was some fuzziness, and I was just happy to move this along, thinking we would, come to it, deal with it, come to it, deal with it, come with it, deal with it. That kind of like, let's just deal with the big problem in front of us and we'll deal with the next problem, and then so on and so forth. Um, Broker definitely was, I don't want to say inexperienced because he did have some business, but it was more of just, there was, having worked in situations where the brokers micromanage their clients, are involved with every little step, and then having a broker who, oh, kind of let big things slide and then kind of went crazy on the smallest little like scheduling stuff, was a very different thing. It was very hard to fully understand what he could do and not do, other than the fact that he wasn't keeping his client aware of what they needed to know during the different
Gotcha.
steps.
So it sounds like it was a lot
Yeah,
on this broker. Like
I
if it
put
was
it on
these,
him,
yeah. So that's
but
fascinating that it really was a, well, from your perspective right now, that it was a broker problem, because I haven't heard that nearly, like hardly ever really. Uh, so that's
well,
fascinating. That's really fascinating.
it's what I've learned is, if this was a more straightforward, simpler deal, I don't think that would have been a problem,
Got it. So he's just maybe not used to
because
doing those complex deals.
yeah, I mean, he had a few agencies, a landscaping company, very much more straightforward businesses. That amount of working capital and the change from the estimate of about 15 months, the two things it was doing was, it would either lower the valuation, or since they had started initially with the idea of trying to get someone interested, they were offering to provide one cash cycle, of capital up front as a draw. So like whatever I didn't use, they would take, and there was a lot of back and forth in that. But like, by moving it even 3 months, and other things we found in due diligence, what we did was all of a sudden the amount of cash they were looking at day one shrunk greatly. So if the complexity of the deal had been less, there were still issues, but I don't think the brokers thing. Where it really started to go was, sellers were doctors, very, very, very smart doctors, husband and wife, 50-50. Yet his part of the business was 92 to 94% of the business. And her part of the business was small. And this was something I took a while, and a little bit of due diligence took, in which case the due diligence did what it was supposed to. But they had, the way they had structured her part of the business, it was this untapped upside and still profitable even this small amount. But if you don't, they weren't, it was not transferable to a new owner. It was all her personal stuff, and they were hiding her stuff in an owner draw, not a salary. So it was
Gotcha.
like, and then we found out they had allocated support staff fully to the main business, but they were still working in her business. So there was like there were things, complexities we found out. But what happened was, these were very smart people, but not business smart. They were very good at providing the services, and they had gotten to a very good business, but they were running it. And I remember when early in my agency days, where I ran this business until I had my business the same way, they were running it pretty much for cash flow and taxes,
Yep.
not
Yeah, like a lot
from,
of small businesses.
yeah, it's like their guiding light was their CPA. Matter of fact, this became an issue into the negotiations, where the CPA had more weight than almost the sellers did in the decision making process.
Gotcha. So, it's interesting. I've seen the same thing so many times where you have small
Mm.
businesses running like most small businesses, or many small businesses do, and they're not set up for due diligence. They're not set up for making sure everything is well aligned. In a lot of cases, it's not even really it it's
Mhm.
possible, but it's not profitable for them to do that. And so, it's a real challenge. I mean, that's one of the things that drives the challenges in small business acquisitions. So so you ran into those problems, and
Mhm.
I recall near the end of this deal when I think it was the last email you sent or the email before where you said there were some red lines I put, red lines I drew in the sand at the very beginning of this deal, and they crossed them. And that was
Right.
the end of the deal. What were some of those red
Well,
lines? What were some of
yeah.
those things you're like, we're not doing that.
So,
That's done.
well, what I said to them was, here, you're kind of so the biggest one was sort of how they were sort of presenting the risk. I had a red line that if the SDE of what they had presented to me was off by more than 20%, that there would either, if at the offer I made would either have to die or we would renegotiate.
Okay.
And they were, the combination of the greater cash flow, the cash cycle being longer, and also, you know, it was one of those ones where they had a lot of dopey things they had just miscalculated, it seemed, in the SDE, and then this big thing about, well, they called it a seller draw, but yeah, her business was literally something that couldn't be done by someone else. It was non-transferable, and yet they wanted me to pay for it and then pay her to keep doing it. And I was like, little, then this chunk, and I'm like, hate to say this, guys, you've just made this 25% less. And I walk them through. It's like, you miscalculated by 30K here. This is not this one-off expense you've had for the past 6 years every year. So that's not, your bonuses to your team. Guess what? Yeah. You can't just disappear that after having it for it. So it was like a lot of little things and then this one big thing. Individually, there were yellow flags. Together, it was this red flag. And that caused a panic in them. And so I kind of came to him like, look, this is the way I would like to handle this. I made a deal based upon what you told me. We found these different things. I don't think, it's not that you lied to me. It's not this. I just think, the data showed something deeper. You have a tax way of looking at this, but your own fractional CFO and the due diligence teams look at the business differently. We found they had two different sets of books, one for running of the business and one kept by the CPA for taxes. And it was like, okay, so I presented this red line. It's like, look, we've hit this. I can't move forward unless we change the structure. I told you I would approach it by changing seller financing before pricing, but you should kind of come back and forth with me. You know, you've told me more importantly, you would like to keep the top line number and a more flexible on financing structure. I'm willing to do that, but it's going to need more. It's going to lower. And I said the big thing is it's not just that, but because you've also committed to this cash flow cycle for working capital, the amount of money at close just shrank by about $500,000. And I know this is a big deal for you. And that set them into a panic, and they just went. So what they did next was they came back with a deal that was so, it's very hard to kind of say because they came back with the top line is they came back with a full 100% seller financing, except for, cash up front, small amount. But the conditions and the way they were kind of doing it, one, it was a take it or leave it. which right then I had spent labor, yeah, great amount of time being collaborative, open, flying back and forth out to Colorado, really being a collaborative buyer. To have a take it or leave it deal. If the terms, yeah, it would have made it hard, but if the terms were good, it was. But the risk structure was such that they could, it wasn't even if I did well or not, they would have levers that they could push me into negative outcomes without me being
Yeah.
able to stop them. And they wouldn't adjust. Yeah. And then they basically, when I said, well, I can't do this. I can't, you know, you've changed the price. Sorry, we found that the business is not strong. You came back with a seller financing deal that doesn't even acknowledge that the business is not as strong as you said. Yes, it has great potential and all this, but it's not this. You didn't even acknowledge that. Two, you're holding these levers of which like the lease, like one of the sellers was like, yeah, of course we're going to raise the lease. We own the building. We want it. Yeah, of course it's our business. So we're going to pay less lease. But when you take it over, you're going to we're going to charge you more for the building. I'm like, but that
Yeah.
means that your business is not as profitable. Yeah. Well,
This
that's for you.
sounds exactly. So a lot of my family is doctors, and
Mm,
what you said in the very earlier on about how doctors, or these doctors in particular, or are fantastic doctors. They're great practitioners,
yeah.
but they're not
Smart.
necessarily great business people. I've
Yeah.
seen that in my family over and over and over and over again. And so, and of course, just across medicine, I think it's actually pretty well known that that's the case. And
Yeah.
so, I guess it's not surprising that this happened, but it is unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, look, at the end, I gave them, I said, look, we've already hit one red line and your offer doesn't address my red line. And then your new deal, your new offer, or their offer, since it was their first offer to me, since it was very weird getting an offer for me to buy them, whatever, however it was structured. Um, it adds these points that these have to be removed for me to even move forward because you would put me in a greater risk. We've talked all along that, and when I talk about there's my own personal risk, obviously I have a family, I have children and all that, but it was also the risk of the entity ongoing. I wanted to, and I said very clearly, my structure is I'm willing to pay a little more in exchange for terms that would be better for the business longer term,
Gotcha.
that medium to long term. Yeah. Basically, as long as I have a good, clean 3 years, after 3 years, even more 2 years, but a clean 2 to 3 years up front where payments are, flexible that I can handle a sudden drop, I could do things. I'm willing to, pay more was, my risk structure because medium long term, it's growth, not,
Gotcha. Okay.
that.
So
But they wouldn't.
if you were going to say you had one or two or even three top learnings from this experience, what would you say they are?
So I did afterwards again, uploading every last transcript from a different point of view and creating sort of a post-mortem. Um, one was the we saw a floating kind of understanding of what some of the different numbers were.
As in, they
That should have
floated
been,
around.
yeah, and not like they were calculated. What we found was they were basically, instead of having one or two, there's usually like a typical acquisition has bank accounts, QuickBooks, and those are the centers of truth.
Yep.
They had bank accounts, QuickBooks, a medical practice software, and then sort of then on top of the QuickBooks, which was just used for taxes, they had a separate tax spreadsheet planning system that the CPA, so there was multiple centers of truth, and they pointed the same direction, but there was variance. That in itself should have been a larger issue early. So basically, clarity of information was one thing.
Okay.
Moving that forward or making that a bigger point earlier. On a personal thing, my approach of like, let's just solve the next problem and anything else will kick down the road. Soon as I realized that one of the sellers was going to be difficult and the other seller would call me separately and be like, they are just that way. I've been dealing with this for years, but in 2 days, they'll change their mind completely. So just let them say their stuff. And then I'm like, I can't.
Yeah.
I'm making a deal with you. I can't, I can't do this so they don't yell at me at bed tonight. I
Yep.
have to actually, deal with this. I kicked the can down the way thinking we could negotiate that. And that didn't happen really until after the LOI was signed, but it was still something that I should have flagged much earlier. And I let it go for another couple of months before it did become a more serious issue. Just that sort of like, this person will say yes until all of a sudden on things they've signed, they've agreed upon multiple times, multiple things, they will then just say, I don't want this anymore. And I'd be
Got it.
like,
Yep.
so
So
there's
dealing with
that. And then,
unprofessional people. So,
or just variable, if there's if you can't work forward or at least an understanding of why a change is occurring, then,
yeah.
you really
Yeah.
can't. And then third, and this is kind of going to something I'm doing with my brother because we have very different approaches. Um, I've teased him for a long time. He goes, his type of acquisitions are the micro acquisitions. This I always call them cigar butts from Graham. You know, basically the study of like finding companies that are overlooked because they're no good, but there's something
Yeah.
really good in them, and you can pull out some revenue. He buys crappy companies, small companies, little digital properties, and he buys them for like one or two revenue, and then is able to eke out 3x, and then they blow up. And he's very good at that. And he's growing and matter of fact does a lot better than I do overall. So he's been pushing me a lot on how I go about it because I like a good collaborative process. I like to grow the pie. The
Yep.
reality, his approach is very much look, there's two sides. There's a teeny middle ground, but the reality is you're either the fool or they hate you. There's no real, so we're going to be talking soon, creating a podcast and a series of videos where we're going to reach out. We have a series of things we want to learn, and we're going to bring on experts at different topics, or people who've gone through that, both someone who's going through it and someone who says that they, do X or Y in that space. And like, okay, these are the things we want to learn. How do we go about understanding this
What's
negotiations?
the
Yeah.
name of the podcast?
Well, it hasn't launched yet, but it's probably going to be the bookends because the joke in
Bookends.
my family is my brother and I are 15 years plus apart, and we're both surprises. Me on the front side and my brother on, they were like, oh, we're pregnant. And then with my brother was like, we can still get pregnant. My sister, because we always give my sister in the middle a hard time because she was planned. But we're the unwanted or the unexpected, not unwanted,
Yeah.
unexpected bookends. My
Gotcha.
dad said that one time. So that's been for my brother and I, we've always jokingly called ourselves the bookends.
It sounds like a great podcast. I mean, it also, I think there's an implication for the books for your business as well. So that
In
that
between.
wraps up
Yeah.
very well. And so wrapping it up, because I think we're about out of time.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I've gone all
You
over the
gave me a
place.
couple gave me a couple of great learnings from this. And I think next you said that you're working on yet another acquisition and or you're
Mhm.
looking into other acquisitions and you're doing
Yes.
some fractional CMO work. And I think you said some passion projects as well. So
Yeah.
if there's a way that we can help promote something you're looking for or promote you,
Sure.
tell me about
Well,
that.
look, so here, the passion project that I put in the back burner. I used to live on the Costa del Sol in Spain. I used to live in Spain. I live now in Maryland and near the ocean in the US. Came back a few years ago. But I love the Costa del Sol. It's becoming, yeah, I used to laugh. It's very much an expat bubble. Yeah, there's now 22% of the population in this section of southern Spain is from born outside of Spain. And you can go through whole sections of the city where everyone's speaking English and you could pretend you're not in a foreign country. Yeah. That's why it's a lot of Brits. But it's fun and it's been moving steadily. It used to be the joke of like the cheap vacation, whatever, but little by little, it's been growing. And even from a business and tech sense, it's becoming a much more growing, pronounced thing. And so I was very interested because, you know, I have a lot of friends who are very affluent, run global businesses while they live there and just travel when they need to. So I had this idea of like, all right, I'm going to, that sort of growing higher end, about 15% of the 22% of that population is, million plus affluent global, however standard. I was like, they're not really talked to. The local English newspapers are all, check out this tea party, or hey, blah, blah, blah is coming, tribute band's going to be playing at the whatever, or, here's how to save $5 on your, or five euros on your groceries this month. So questions of that aspirational living, that higher end, affluent living. So I started that just a week ago, and that's a lot of fun. And so if you're living in the Coast of Sol, go check out waypointsir.com. Um, I've picked up a few more now that I'm not actively in the middle of due diligence working. I'm working on a couple of fractional CMO and I have a couple more spaces. That's a horrible way of putting it, but I have a few more hours working. So if you are sort of facing that, the way I look at it, I come very much from a business owner, and I've worked everything from P&G and other global, you know, corporations all the way down to I'm helping some guy now who has a distillery here on the coast. Yeah, I kind of prefer the smaller local. Yeah, if you're running a few $1 million a year, but you're more around the question of how do you how do you balance your message, your effort with your business goals? Those are the things I kind of love, but it's
Okay.
more always when you're fractional CMO, it's always more of like who knocks on your door rather than what you want to do. And
Yep.
then last, if you have an interesting acquisition you want some help on, or you want some advice, just give me a shout. Or if you have something you're trying to sell and you want someone to take a serious look.
Fantastic. All right. Well, AJ, thank you so much. This has been enlightening as always. Every time I talk to you, I'm learning something new. Um,
Sorry, it's been all, yeah, but no, Jason, it's been great.
I'm excited to see some of those prompts that you were using, the actual
Yep.
actionable stuff that you're doing, and I'll get that after you get that sent over. I'll get that out also on my newsletter with those resources. So thank you so
Yeah.
much. As always, it's fantastic to talk to you, and I'll talk to you soon.